Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for being here. As I said yesterday, those who were here yesterday, we had our first opening of the year with the new students. We exchanged a few administrative, information, a few flavor of the flavor of the school, and now comes the time for substance and for opinionated substance, also very scientifically grounded substance. By one of the economists I admire the most. He's a French economist. He's made his career in the US. He's been a Harvard star, trained generations of economists, created theories that are very high level and that inspire research today at a very high level. Research on growth, on innovation. If you've heard the name Schumpeter, that's the new Schumpeter of macroeconomics and economics of innovation. I won't say more because you've come here to listen to him. I have another twist to mention because Philippe Aghion has been supportive for the school ever since I arrived here in Sciences Po, since 2020. He's been, if you have now in your curriculum a data and digital slot, those hours that you will have to study on data, digital, AI, that's because of him or thanks to him and thanks to his support. We've been pioneer in Sciences Po for that. And in a few days, I look at Céline Antonin, who is sitting here, we will be inaugurating the Innovation Lab, an annex to the Innovation Lab that Philippe is directing. He may say a few words about it when it comes to Q&A, and we'll be opening it here at the school in Sciences Po. So we are very honored and privileged to host Philippe Aghion today for the inaugural lecture.
Thanks. Can you hear me if I speak with it's better if I'm said, I'm close to a micro. Yeah. Okay. Well, yes, that's it like this. Well, so thank you so much, Natasha, for inviting me. And it's a great honor to be here with you've done a great job pushing the School of Management and Impact, now it's called, and thank you what it is now. So I'm very honored to be here and with you. The title of my lecture will be The Power of Creative Destruction, which is the title of a book that I co-authored with Céline Antonin, with yours. No, that's even better. So then I can move here, because otherwise a bit excellent. Yeah, I feel much better. Thank you so much. This book, it's very much so it's based on years of work, and I've been working on this for the past 38 years. Oh my God, yeah, that's a lot. So here is a picture of young Schumpeter, and an Austrian economist who has, and Schumpeter is known for having coined the term creative destruction. And by creative destruction, Schumpeter referred to the process whereby new innovations displace old technologies. New innovations make old technologies obsolete, okay? So that's what Schumpeter had in mind. And for example, he displays it in Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy, or in other writings, and that's very much. But you see, when I studied economics, there was no growth model embodying creative destruction. You see, the state of the art at the time was the neoclassical growth model. I don't know if you studied the Solo model, where growth is driven primarily by capital accumulation. And of course, on the reasonable assumption of decreasing returns to capital accumulation, you cannot grow forever just with capital accumulation. At some moment, you run out of steam. You increase production a lot if you move from 0 machine to 1 machine, but if you move from 90 machine to 91 machine, you don't increase production by that much. So if you just rely on capital accumulation, there is not much growth that you can expect in the long run. And we know that the basic engine of growth is exactly what you're pushing inside in the school. It's innovation. And so what we did is that there was no such model of growth based on innovation and creative destruction. So with Peter Howitt, whom I met at MIT 38 years ago, we designed a new growth paradigm, which now is commonly referred to Schumpeterian growth paradigm. So if you go on ChatGPT and you type Schumpeterian growth, they will refer to our paradigm. So the paradigm is rests on 3 main ideas. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. Okay, we always stand on the shoulders of giants of previous innovators. Okay. The second idea is that innovations do not come from heaven. They result from entrepreneurial activities that are motivated by the prospect of innovation rents. If I invent a new product or a cheaper way to produce, for a while I will have monopoly rents until I'm being superseded or imitated by someone else who will make me become obsolete myself. So, but at least if I innovate for a while, I will enjoy monopoly profits. Okay? And the third idea is creative destruction. New innovations displace old technologies. New innovations make old technologies obsolete. That's the Schumpeterian idea there. And what's interesting is that at the heart of this paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need the innovation rents to induce innovation. Okay, it's very important that you know that if you innovate, you get some rents. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are very tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovations because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating a market economy is very much about how to manage this contradiction. You want to reward the innovators, but you want to make sure they won't use this reward to prevent subsequent innovation. And we will see that this contradiction is there everywhere, whether you talk about secular stagnation, whether you talk about middle income trap, whether you talk about inequality and growth, you always come across this contradiction, okay? And how can you overcome this contradiction? Schumpeter himself was very pessimistic about the future of capitalism because he thought that the first innovators would successfully prevent any subsequent innovation, and therefore capitalism would stall, you see. But in fact, it didn't. So what happened? How come? So here, for example, I represent a firm with 4 lines, okay? So it's a firm that does 4 things, and the length of the bars tells you how good you are at the various activities. Okay, so here you have a firm F, particularly good at the second from the left activity, but not so good at the third one. Okay, and voilà, you are very good at this one, not so good. But how do you expand? You expand because you would do creative destruction on another line, which I don't represent here. There is someone else here, managing this line. Let me go there. And you do creative destruction by improving upon that the current producer on that line. And in that case, firm F expands from being a 4-line firm to a 5-line firm. How do you shrink? You shrink if someone else does creative destruction on one of your lines, and then firm F shrinks from being a 4-line firm to a 3-line firm. How do you enter in this model? You are nobody, and you innovate upon one line, and you become a 1-line firm. How you exit? You are a 1-line firm. Someone innovates upon you, and you exit the market. So it's very easy to represent really what's at the heart of market economy: entry, exit, firm expansion, firm decline. And the life and what you teach, it's all about, and the very dynamic economies are those economies where you have a lot of turnover, you have a lot of new firms replacing old firms, and you can grow when when you are good. You see what I mean? So the idea is that you want to allow startups, and you want to allow good startups to grow, maybe at the expense of those who are not so good. And that's a very dynamic economy, okay? So there are 2 distinctive predictions of the Schumpeterian paradigm. The first one is that growth is positively correlated with firm turnover. Firm turnover means that you have a lot of entry and exit of firms or a lot of job creation, job destruction. So for example, here I represent on the horizontal axis various measures of turnover across countries, across regions, and on the vertical axis I represent the rate of per capita GDP growth, okay? Places where you have more turnover, you tend to have more growth. Voilà. You need to have turnover. Places where you don't have much turnover, you don't have much growth. For example, the five most innovating firms, and I will get back to that later, in Europe are the same as 25 years ago. Not in the US, but the US is growing faster than we are. Okay? There is more creative destruction there than we have here. Okay? So another thing which is also very interesting is that there is a relationship between firm's age and firm size. Remember, I told you when you enter, you are a one-line firm, and then you may grow by innovating upon other lines, and you expand. So if you want to look at the relationship between firm age and firm size, in expected term, you tend to have a positive relationship. You start small and you tend to grow. Alors, you don't grow linearly, quoi. You may grow, shrink, but in expected terms, you tend to grow with age. You see that in the US, the relationship is much steeper. You grow much more with age. Why is the case? Because when you are good in the US, you get funding, you get venture capital, you get institutional investors, you get bank securitization. You have a financial system in the US that allows good innovators to grow faster. And therefore, they can drive out the less efficient. So when you survived enough, not only it means that you are really good, because otherwise you have been driven out by better firms, and you find the financing to grow more. So that explains why in the US you have a steeper relationship between firm age and firm size, you see? And you see in Mexico much less, and in India less. In India what happens is when you run out of brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law, you stop growing the firm. I'm joking there, huh? It's not true completely, but you don't trust that much, and you stop growing. Mexico is like this, and France is more like close to Mexico than close to US. We would like France to be close to US. We are not yet there, okay? So now another prediction of the Schumpeterian paradigm is that more intense competition enhances innovation by frontier firms and discourages innovation by non-frontier firms. So here you are a classroom. You are all the same. You are all equally good. But suppose some of you are the top of the class and some of you are the bottom of the class. And I open the door and I let a very good element in the room. What will happen? The top of the class will work harder to remain the top of the class. But those at the bottom of the class who are already discouraged, they will be even more discouraged once I let this new element into the room, okay? And it's the same with firms. So here I represent the blue line are firms that are close to the technological frontier in their sector. They are the very good ones, the top of the class. The orange line represents firms that are far below the technological frontier in their own sector, okay? And you see that more competition, you see, will enhance innovation and growth of firms that are close to the frontier, the blue ones, but it will discourage innovation and growth by firms below the frontier. Okay, that's a very important. So those who are the best, there is an escape competition effect. They innovate more to escape the competition, but they know they can win because they're already very good. The other orange firms, they are discouraged by more competition. Okay, but when you are a more developed country, you tend to have more blue firms compared to orange firms. So the more developed a country is, the more growth enhancing it is to have competition, because the more blue firms you have compared with orange firms. So it's always good to have competition. It's particularly important for growth to have competition when you are an advanced countries with a lot of blue firms and not so many orange firms. Okay. So through the lens of the Schumpeterian paradigm, you can do three main things. The first thing you can do is to revisit some main enigmas in economic history. The second thing you can do is to question some common wisdoms. And the third thing you can do is to rethink the future of capitalism, the future of market economy. So let me talk about the enigma. So a first enigma is secular stagnation. The second one is the middle income trap. And the third one I will talk about is innovation and inequality. Are you still alive? You're still there? Oh la la, you are brave. I will have a glass of water because I'm losing my voice, And I will, oh la la, that's very kind. I mean, Natasha, really, thank you so much. But you can have a glass as well. You are still there? Don't leave, don't go. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so what I want to show you is this. I want to talk about secular stagnation. I've lost you there. Secular stagnation. If you look at the average yearly rate of productivity growth in the US, you can see that productivity growth, soared up during the year 1995 to 2000. So I represent the average yearly rate of productivity growth, okay, of TFP growth, or total factor productivity growth. You see that there is an upsurge of growth between 95 and 2005. Why is that? It's the IT revolution. The IT revolution induced a growth boost. And we believe that the AI has the potential also to boost growth, okay? But you can see that as of 2005, there was a significant decline in growth in the US. And you want to understand why was that? And in fact, the phenomenon is as follows, and we will get into the Schumpeterian contradiction that I was mentioning before. What happened, so we know that it's particularly in the IT producing sectors, the black curve, and the IT using sector, the gray curve, that you have this upsurge of growth followed by growth decline, okay? And the thing which is very interesting is that what happened is with the IT revolution, you had the emergence of superstar firms, Walmart, Microsoft, Amazon. Those firms became big, okay? And you can see that the concentration, so here I look at concentration in services, which is the share of sales of the 4 biggest firms, or the share of sales of the 20 biggest firms in the US. You can see that there is an acceleration in concentration during that period, precisely when you had the growth upsurge, you see? So it means that when you had the IT revolution, only a few firms knew how to harness the power of IT, and they managed better than other firms. And that's why concentration went up, okay? And you can see here as well, you look at the average markup, it went up, that's the red curve, but not so much because within firms it went up, that's the blue curve. You don't see any upward trend in the blue curve. It's the black curve, and the black curve, it's the composition effect. In fact, it tells you that what happened is that the average markup went up because the high markup firms, which were the superstar firms, became more pervasive through merger and acquisitions in particular. They became tentacular in the US economy. They became dominant, okay? And so, in fact, what you've had is that when you had the IT revolution, a few firms became superstar firms, became hegemonic, became pervasive. And the problem with that is that they ended up discouraging entry of new firms. That's the Schumpeterian conundrum. If you look here at the entry rate of firms of more than 10,000 employees at the red curve, or below 1,000 with the light gray or the dark gray between 1,000 and 10,000, you see the entry rates of any kind of firm went down. So in fact, the story is that when you had the IT revolution, a few firms, superstar firms, did very well, and they expanded through merger and acquisition in particular, and they ended up discouraging entry of new firms. And that's why you had this secular stagnation. So there are people like Bob Gordon who believe that it was kind of, unavoidable to have the growth decline. And the idea there is not unavoidable at all. Had we adapted our competition institutions, had we reformed competition policy to adapt to the IT revolution, we would have avoided the growth decline. You see, and I will get back to that when I talk about AI. Okay, so that's very interesting because you have a view of the growth decline, which is very different than if you just say, it's because we run out of ideas are harder to find, or any other reason. No, our ideas are never harder to find. It's just because our competition institution, our competition policy did not adapt to the IT revolution, okay? Now, middle income trap. Middle income trap, there is the following idea. You have two ways to generate productivity growth. Either I can innovate upon myself, or I can imitate the frontier technology. When I imitate the frontier, I do imitation. When I innovate upon myself, I call that frontier innovation. When you are a country very far below the frontier, like China was in 1978 when Deng Xiaoping took over, you essentially grow by imitation. You are very much below the technological frontier, so you try to imitate, to absorb the frontier technologies, okay? That's your main channel of growth. When you are already at the frontier, by imitating, you don't get much thrust. It's mainly by innovating upon yourself, okay? So that's why I say frontier innovation becomes increasingly important for growth as a country moves closer to the technological frontier. And the second idea is that the policies that are good to favor imitation are not the same policies as those that are good to favor frontier innovation. If you are in the business of catching up, of imitation, it's very important. That's what China, that's really what drove Chinese growth over the past 40 years, was mainly, foster technology transfers, reallocate factors, and improve management practices. And very much, that's what China. So it's the combination. In fact, they had an educated labor force with the openness, in particular when they joined in the WTO, they could absorb the more advanced technologies, and that's how China grew fast. You see, mainly by imitation initially, okay? Now, if you are in the business of frontier innovation, we saw already that competition is important, so product market liberalization is important. But it's important also to have a financial ecosystem. I will talk about that in a moment. You need venture capital. If you are in the business, if you are a startup in high tech, bank finance is not so much what you are looking for. You look for venture capital, for pension funds and mutual funds that would help you. That's what you need. And you need research foundation, you need good graduate schools, you need appropriate industrial policy. You need other things that you don't need so much when you are in the business of imitation, okay? And the problem is that if you look at Korea, for example, that's the per capita average yearly rate of growth of per capita GDP. And you see it was very high right after the Korean War. I talk about South Korea, of course, not North Korea. And they grew very fast. But then you see a steep decline in the growth rate. Alors, partly because they were catching up. Of course, when you are way below the frontier, by imitating the frontier, you make huge upward jumps. So it's normal that it's not surprising that as you get closer to the technological frontier, the rate of growth should go down. But there's something else that happened in Korea. During the catch, and again we get into the Schumpeterian conundrum that I mentioned at the beginning. As Korea, during the catching up phase of Korea, you had the emergence of superstar firms again, of big conglomerates called the chaebols. And the chaebols were very much protected by the Korean government. They drove the growth process through imitation. But the problem is that they were inhibiting entry of non-chaebols. And they were blocking innovation, and they didn't want. And not only that, but not only they were deterring entry, but also they pushed the government not to implement competition. You see, at some moment when you become sufficiently close to the technological frontier, you should move from institutions that favor imitation to institutions that favor frontier innovation. We know that one of them is competition policy. So at some moment, Korea should have reformed its competition policy to favor entry, and because that's more important for frontier growth. But the problem is that those conglomerates precisely said, no, you work with us. They captured the government. The Korean government was captured by the superstar, by the conglomerates. And it took the crisis of the late 90s to weaken the power of the chaebols so that entry of non-chaebol firms resumed. And also the Korean government agreed to reforming its competition and trade policy. So you had a good thing to a crisis. The crisis of the late 90s in Korea, in fact, had the virtuous effect of weakening the power of the chaebols, thereby not only favoring entry and innovation by non-chaebols, but also relieving pressure from the government. Government then agreed to reform its competition policy, you see. And that allowed Korea to resume growth. Korea started to grow faster after the crisis of the 1990s, okay? So that's very important. And now other countries are subject to the same syndrome. Japan, is anybody from Japan here? Japan is not a middle income, but it has the same syndrome. Japan has a good policy for catching up. It also innovates in various domains. But what happened is that during the catching up phase in Japan, you had the emergence of conglomerates called the keiretsus. Similarly, the keiretsus not only discourage entry of non-keiretsus, but they successfully put pressure to not move towards more trade liberalization and competition. And that's why partly Japan is stuck and is now had low growth rate after having experienced very high growth rates. Okay. Alors now there is us ourselves, because you could say, well, it's very nice, Philippe Aghion, you talk about China, you talk about Japan. What about France? You know, are you so good in France and Europe? No. We are pretty bad. Okay, so there's been, and our colleague Antonin Bergeau has done very interesting work on EU versus US. So for example, already you can see, if you look at the per capita GDP of the EU area, of the Eurozone, of the Euro area compared to the US. So I put at one the per capita GDP of the US, and then I look as a fraction of it, the evolution of the per capita GDP. You can see first that here, the per capita GDP of Europe, of the Eurozone, drops, and that's very much because of the war. Of course, that's not surprising. The Second World War, it destroyed enormous amount of capital, of physical capital in Europe, not at all in the US, okay? Then you have a catching up. After World War II, Europe catches up with the US, and you can see that starting in the late 80s, the gap between per capita GDP of the US and per capita GDP of Europe widens up again. So since the 90s, Europe is again losing to the US. Okay? And that's what we are that's the problem. So, you know, now everybody was surprised. You know, why is it that Mr. Trump, hosts Mrs. von der Leyen on his golf court in Scotland, you know, which is not even an EU country, you know? Why is it that, you know, you have all this, you know, bowing attitude of Europeans vis-à-vis the US? Because we haven't done our job. We declined. We are in decline. Europe is declining. And not only you can see that by looking at per capita GDP, you can see that looking at innovations. You can see particularly that patents in high tech. You can see China is now emerging, the blue, but Europe is the green, and Europe is declining. And so you see, by various measures, we are declining, okay? And I was mentioning before the contrast between Europe and the US with respect to creative destruction. If you look at the top patenting firms in the US, in 2000 and in 2023, they are not the same. They only, except from Qualcomm, it's not the same firms. Europe, it's essentially the same firms, you see? So you have lots of creative destruction. Why? Because you have new firms that went into high tech, and European firms got stuck in mid-tech incremental innovation. Where do you implement breakthrough high-tech innovation? In the US, not in Europe, despite the fact that if you look at the origins of ideas of patents in disruptive technology, Europe, researchers play a big role. The breakthrough innovations in hydrogen, genome, computer vision, blockchain, they largely cite European paper by European researchers. So we are very good researchers, but we can't translate our basic research into innovations implemented in Europe. It's done on the other side of the Atlantic, because we don't have the ecosystem that allows us to implement the innovation, to build on our own ideas, to implement breakthrough innovations, okay? So that's the thing. And so in fact, why did we catch up after the war, Europe? We caught up because thanks to the Marshall Plan, we could rebuild our capital stock, and also because we had an educated workforce, and we could absorb the new technological revolution from US. That's what the drivers of the catching up of Europe between 1945 and the late 1980s. But then what happened is that why did we decline? Because then you had the IT revolution that I mentioned in the US, and Europe was unable to fully take advantage. We did not get into the train. We did not get into the train of the IT revolution. We did not fully take advantage. It was started in the US. We should have harnessed that revolution, and we did not manage to. Why not? Because there are obstacles to frontier innovation in Europe, and that's the Draghi report. I don't want to spend much time on it, but it's very interesting that the Draghi report is exactly falling into Schumpeterian approach to middle income trap, okay? So why we need first a truly single market for innovation. In the US, it's a single market. China is also a big market. Europe, you have many barriers across European countries. You see what I mean? The barriers between European countries are much more important than the barriers we face from Trump. We add to the European regulations. Each member state adds its own regulations to the on the market for goods and services to the European regulation. We call that gold plating. Okay, so it's a very bad practice, and that's political economy, of course. So we have many barriers which stand in the way of achieving a fully integrated single market for innovations. So if you are an innovator, you want to move to the US because then you have a big market for innovation. If you stay in Europe, it's a hassle because you have endless regulations, okay? The second thing is that they have an adequate financial ecosystem in the US. Venture capital, institutional investors, bank securitization. We don't have any of this very much in Europe. And the third thing is they have the DARPA. They have, very well-funded basic research and industrial policy in areas like defense, or you have the DARPA. DARPA, it's a very modern way to do industrial policy. Okay, when it's what you realize that there is a domain like space and defense when you need to make a big push. The money comes from the government, it's top-down, but then you pick a team leader, and the team leader has full freedom to elicit competing projects. We saw that with BARDA, with the COVID. We are all here thanks to the BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Authority, which is the counterpart of DARPA for biotech. And they have one for energy, an ARPA energy, they have an ARPA infrastructure. That played a big role to push innovation in those key areas. We don't have any equivalent in Europe of the DARPA, okay? So that's what I want to tell you about the middle income trap. So China is subject, Korea was subject to it, Japan is subject to it, but Europe is also subject to the middle income trap syndrome. And we need to get out of the middle income trap, okay? And we need to reform our institutions. Okay, the third idea is innovation and inequality. I don't want to spend too much time. There is the well-known work by Piketty, Saez, Atkinson, looking at the share of income of the top 1% income earners. And we see that since the 1980s, the share of income of the top 1% or the top 0.1% income earners in the US has gone up. The question is, why is that? What is the source of top income? Is it a big deal? Innovation is a source of top income inequality. Why? Because if I innovate, I get a rent from my innovation. So that pushes me towards the top of the income distribution. So innovation is a source of top income. It's a good source because, in fact, innovation gives me growth. And also innovation induces social mobility. Why? Because of creative destruction. What does it mean, creative destruction? It means that someone new replaces someone older. So that means upward mobility for the new innovator and downward mobility for the old innovator. So innovation is a source of social mobility. So it's true that innovation is a source of top income inequality, but it increases social mobility, it fosters growth, and so it's a good source of top income inequality. In fact, if I look here, and that's based on work that I've done with Axigid, Bergeau, Blandel, and Emus, we, on cross-state panel data, cross-US state panel data, what we did is to say, well, look, places where you have more innovation intensity in the US, what is the effect on top 1% income share? And you can see that the higher the innovation intensity, the higher the share of the top income earners. Okay, so it's true that innovation is a source of top income inequality. But if you look now at the effect of innovation intensity on the Gini, on the more global measure of inequality, which is a measure of how far I am for perfect equality, you see there is no effect because, in fact, innovation, it's true it increases top income inequality, but it also increases social mobility. And as a result, if you look at the effect of innovation on overall, on global inequality, it has no effect So it's a very good source of top income inequality. And if you look here, we look across commuting zones in the US, places where you have the highest level of innovation intensity are also those places in the US where social mobility is bigger. What I mean social mobility, it means that the children's income is less correlated with parental income. Places where you innovate more are places where children's income is less correlated with parental income. So that's a virtuous source. So you see, innovation is a good source of social mobility. But lobbying is a bad source, because lobbying, it means that it's entry barriers. Existing firms lobby, like the chaebols, to keep their rents. So that's a source of top income inequality, but it's a bad source because you prevent entry of new innovators. So that's bad for growth. Because you prevent entry, you prevent creative destruction, it's bad for social mobility. And therefore, lobbying has everything wrong. It's bad for growth. It's bad for social mobility. It increases top income inequality, and as a result, it increases global inequality as well. I can see the areas in the US with the highest level of lobbying are also those areas which have the highest level of top income inequality. But even now, if you look at the Gini, which is here, you can see that those places in the US with the highest level of lobbying, they are also those places with higher Gini. Whereas if I put innovation intensity instead of lobbying, I had no effect on the Gini. You see, so that's where I differ from Piketty, for example, for whom I have enormous respect. But my difference with Piketty is that for Piketty, it doesn't matter. The rich are the rich. For me, it very much matters if you become rich because you innovated, you are a Steve Jobs, or if you became rich because you have some rents. I call that a Carlos Slim. Maybe I'm unfair. Carlos Slim is a Mexican citizen who maybe was an innovator in his youth, but the Carlos Slim I've known is a Carlos Slim that became very rich when they made this telecom company a non-regulated monopoly in Mexico. Then he became enormously rich. And so you see, that's different. You can become rich because you do lobbying, and you can become rich because you innovate. And you can't treat those two sources of wealth the same way. Although, even if someone innovates, your first name, Florent, even if you become rich, Florent, by innovating, I want still to make sure you won't use the rents to prevent subsequent innovation. But that I will do not only through tax policy, but also through competition policy. I will make sure that competition policy is there to prevent you from deterring new entry and new innovators, okay? So that's but you see, my view of inequality and growth is driven by that. Make sure that you don't kill. I don't want to kill innovation, because it's a source of top income inequality, because innovation is a good source of top income inequality. Yet, I want to make sure that your rents, you won't use them to prevent new entry, and I will use competition policy for that. See, that's my view. That's the view we have about inequality and growth, you see, which is very different from the one you have when you're non-Schumpeterian. Okay. I now move to questioning common wisdom. I will focus on AI, okay? AI, so a common wisdom is that AI has very little growth potential, but very negative employment potential, okay? And there are very renowned economists, including a Nobel Prize winner of last year called Daron Acemoglu, and I co-author a paper with Daron. I like very much Daron, but on this, we have a respectful disagreement, at least respectful on my side. Okay, so why should I believe that AI is growth enhancing? Because AI automates tasks not only in the production of goods and services, but also in the production of ideas. With AI, it's easier to find new ideas. It's easier to recombine old ideas to find new ideas. So AI has a big growth potential, okay? Both because you automate, you make it easier to produce goods and services, but you also make it easier to produce ideas, and therefore you make the innovation technology more efficient. If some people believed ever that ideas would be harder to find, with AI, they will become easier to find, I can tell you. So, for example, the big disagreement is that Daron believes, just looking at AI automating tasks in the production of goods and services, he believes that the AI revolution will increase for a 10-year period the growth rate by 0.07 percentage point. If you start at 1% per year, for 10 years you grow at 1.07 It's James Bond, 0.07, okay? And in fact, work I've done myself with Simon Bunel, which is our third co-author on the book with Céline, looking at the same empirical literature, we think that a much more reasonable figure is that we believe that if you just look at AI as automating the production of goods and services, is not 0.07 additional percentage point, is 0.7 additional percentage point. If you are growing at 1% before, for 10 years you grow at 1.7, and then you go back to 1. Just looking at AI automating tasks in the production of service. But remember that AI also automate tasks in the production of ideas. So in fact, you see, that shows it. The dotted line is the growth, the evolution of GDP without AI. If you just look at AI automating tasks in the production of goods and services for 10 years, you will grow faster, and then you will grow at the same rate. There's the red curve. But in fact, on top of that, we don't AI automate tasks in the production of ideas. So it's not the red curve that you have; it's the light blue curve that you have. And permanently, it will be steeper here than it is without AI. Whereas if you are just looking at AI automating tasks in the production of goods and services, after 10 years, you would grow at the same rate, but you will be higher GDP. But here, even you grow faster. You have a steeper curve here than you have here. Okay, and that we have not yet quantified the extra growth that you draw from, automating tasks in the production of ideas. That's still in the, cooking. It is still in the kitchen. But what we see is that if you look at the share of patents that cites AI papers, this share has soared up since 2010. You see what I mean? You had a takeoff of the share of patents that cites AI papers. And what's interesting is that those patents that cite AI papers, they are more cited. They have a higher degree of originality. They have a higher degree of generality. They are more cited, they are higher quality. So you had a surge in patents that are important patents, that are important ideas. It's not only that you generate more ideas, you generate more important ideas, okay? Alors, we still have to quantify, the contribution to growth of this surge in, AI patents, okay? But I believe it's considerable. So my point is that, unlike Darren, I believe that technologically speaking, AI has a very high growth potential, okay? But the thing is that there is an obstacle. An obstacle is competition. You remember when I talked about IT, I told you that IT boosted growth in the US, but also favored the emergence of superstar firms that ended up discouraging entry of new innovators. Well, the same problem arises with AI. If you look at the upstream segments of the AI value chain, in particularly the cloud, is dominated by 3 superstar firms, the same one as those that emerged with the IT revolution. It's Amazon, Google, Microsoft. You have only one big actor, GPU, on the market for graphic processors. So the problem, the AI and growth, is not so much that AI, technologically speaking, cannot deliver growth. It has a huge growth potential, but we need to adapt our competition policy. And what does it mean that we need to adapt our competition policy? It means that we need to have open source. It's very important. We need to have data access. Important. We have too many regulations in Europe. No question. Too many regulations. We need regulations, but we need the right regulation. When you have too many regulations, the large firms know how to cope with them. They're not the small entrants. We have too many regulations in Europe. Okay, and also in Europe, when someone wants to do a merger and acquisition, you only look at the effect on the market share. You don't look at whether the merger and acquisition would deter future entry, future innovation. So we need to also reform our competition policy. So to sum up, AI has, technologically speaking, has a big growth potential, but we need to adapt our institution. In particular, we need to adapt our competition policy to fully take advantage of this growth potential of AI, okay? So the obstacle is not technological, it's us. We need to adapt. It's like a horse. A horse is big power, but he can take you to the wall, or he can take you to a good place, depending on how you drive the horse. And that's what I mean here. We need to have the right policies and institutions to fully harness the growth potential of AI, okay? So now let me talk about employment. The common wisdom is that AI will have dramatically negative effect on employment. I don't want to be, kind of a dreamer, say, there is no problem, it all goes fine. But I want just to nuance a bit the words there on this. Here we looked at we did that for a report that we wrote for an AI report I wrote for the French government last year. So what we did is that we considered 9,000 representative firms with more than 50 employees. And we did an even study. We looked at the evolution of employment in firms that adopted AI between 2017 and 2020, that's the treatment group, and similar firms that did not adopt AI, okay? And that, again, was done with Simon Bunel in the context of the AI Commission that we had last year that produced this report for President Macron. And what you can see is that overall, compared with the control group, those firms that adopt AI, at least on the sample period that we looked at, overall they created employment. Alors you might think, but that's how come? Because AI, I told you before, you are automating tasks in the production of goods and services. So if anything, you are replacing manpower with machines. How come you create employment? It's because it's true you have this substitution effect, but you have a counteracting productivity effect that we also analyzed in the context of robots with Céline, Xavier Jaravel and Simon Bunel. And we had the same productivity effect of robotization, okay? And the idea is that, in fact, what happens is that those firms that adopt AI, like those firms that adopt robotization, they become more productive. Because they become more productive, they become more competitive. So therefore, they increased the world market demand for their products. And therefore, there is more world market for their product. And therefore, they increase the demand for new employees. You see what I mean? Employment demand goes up because those firms that adopt robots or that adopt AI, they become more productive, therefore more competitive, and therefore people, the consumers that would never have bought this kind of goods, they start finding it very interesting to buy this kind of goods, and therefore the market, the world market for these goods expands, and therefore there is need for more employees to produce more. Do you understand? And you can see here that the sales, compared to the control group, those firms in the treatment group that automate, that adopt AI, they increase their sales. So that tells that really this reflects fully this productivity effect that I'm talking about, okay? And that's something that people, and that's why, by the way, if you look at previous technological revolution, the steam engine, there was the Luddites movement in England because workers were very scared that new machines would make them redundant. You never observed mass unemployment in England following the steam engine revolution, the first industrial revolution. Then when you had the electricity revolution, Keynes predicted mass unemployment in the US. It never happened. And robots, we had the candidate in the presidential election 2017 who was advocating taxing robots because he was concerned that robotization would increase unemployment. It didn't. There was no need for taxing. In fact, it was even worse. If you tax robots, you tax firms that become more productive by robotizing. You see what I mean? And therefore, you prevent them from increasing employment. It's counterproductive to have a tax on robots. Okay, and so that's very interesting, this productivity effect more than counteracts the substitution effect, okay? And that's where we go against the common wisdom that robotization and AI are necessarily bad for employment. No, they are not bad for employment. Alors, they're not uniformly good for employment. For example, if you look at AI adoption for administrative purpose on highly exposed and substitutable employment, you find that there the effect is not very positive, okay? But that's very much a subset of jobs. I don't want to go into much detail there. Just want to say that here you can classify jobs. When you go from left to right, you go from jobs where most of the tasks can be substituted by AI to jobs where most of the tasks are complemented by AI. When you move from bottom to top, you go from jobs that are not very exposed to AI to jobs that are highly exposed to AI. And now you see, of course, for the jobs first that are not exposed to AI, effect of AI on employment is negligible. It's not a surprise. If now you look at the Northeast, you look at those jobs that are highly exposed, but most of the tasks are, AI does not substitute for the task, they complement the task. You should expect a positive relation, you find a positive relation. The big surprise was there. We were expecting that if you focus attention on those jobs that are highly exposed and most of the tasks are substituted by AI, the effect of AI would be negative on employment. No, it's still positive, but it depends which use of AI you consider. AI used for production process or ICT security has a positive effect on employment. It's only AI used for administration process which has a negative. So to be a negative effect, you need a job which is highly exposed, where most of the tasks can be substituted by AI, and you use AI for administrative purpose. It represents a very small fraction of jobs. So we are very far from the catastrophic view that Giovanni Di Ampoli, if you read his book, you think that you can kill yourself. I mean, I like this guy, but when he talks about AI, you think that you will just shoot, you will just throw yourself in the Seine River after reading the book. That AI is the end of it, that there is what I call an existential risk. No, I don't believe there is an existential risk. But still, in the same way as you needed to reform competition policy to harness the growth potential of AI, to harness the job creation of AI, you need education and you need a good labor market institution. In Denmark, when you lose your job for 2 years, you get 90% of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. We need to have both a very good education system and very good labor market policy. If we have those, we can harness the employment creation potential of it. So in each case, you see, in itself, AI is no devil. It's all depends, all rests on the policies and institutions we put in place to adapt to this technological revolution, okay? And that's the kind of main theme I want to push here. It's not, never believe, happiness or unhappiness is the joint result of technology and institutions. The technology is not wrong here. What's wrong, might be wrong, is the institution. And that's what you can change. And that's what's very encouraging, because that's something we can act upon, okay? I get now to the last part, and on rethinking capitalism, okay, or rethinking market economy. So US does poorly on inequality and social protection, and Europe does poorly on innovation, okay? So for example, if I look at the Gini, which is a global measure of inequality, when you have a Gini of 0, everybody earns the same. When you have a Gini of 1, Natasha earns everything and everybody else earns nothing, okay? So you can see that the US has a higher Gini than France, Germany, the Scandinavians, okay, more global inequality in the US. Similarly, poverty rate higher in the US but than it is in Germany, France, or the Scandinavian. But you also, this, that's drawn from the joint, I don't know why Deaton, the name disappeared. It's Case and Deaton and Case and Angus Deaton. They looked at the death of despair phenomenon in the US. In the US, an increasing fraction of unskilled middle-aged workers die. And they die because their life is hell, essentially. They are overstressed. And because they are overstressed, they take opioids, sleeping pills, they eat pizzas a lot. I love pizza, but they become very obese, okay? And they, voilà, like in the Monty Python, quoi. And they, voilà. And that's why you had this upward slope of the death of despair. You have in the US a phenomenon of death of despair, okay? And which you don't have in France and Germany. The number of deaths per 100,000 inhabitants in the unskilled middle age is falling in Germany and France. It is sharply rising in the US. So the social model of the US, I would recommend to nobody. I mean, in the US, if you are wealthy and a good job and job security, you are okay. But if you don't have job security and you are poor, you better never get sick. You better never have a problem there. Okay. Now, if you look at the innovation, then the US is much better than we are. if you look, for example, at the triadic patents, triadic patents are very good quality patents. There are those patents registered in the Japanese Patent Office, European Patent Office, and US Patent Office. They are very, very good patents. If you look at the number of patents per million inhabitants, US is very much above China and EU 27. Okay? So they are much better innovators, the US, than we are in Europe. But we have a better social model in Europe. We can still improve it. Now, there are people who say, well, you know, if you want to become as innovative as the US, you should give up your social model. And so there are people who believe that it's an either or. Either you choose to be innovative and you give up on the social and you become the very bad social model of the US, or you decide to be protective and then you give up on innovation. And I disagree with that. I think we can have policies that make us both more innovative and more protective and inclusive. Okay, one such policy is flexicurity of the labor market. One is education, one is competition. Let me talk about them. I told you about the death of despair in the US. And I told you about the labor market policy in Denmark. I told you when you lose your job in Denmark, for 2 years, you get 90% of your salary. The state retrains you, and the state helps you find a new job. Well, my colleague, our colleague Alexandra Roulet, she looked at the evolution of the health of a worker in Denmark whose firm closes down to the health of an identical worker in age, experience, and education in a firm that does not close down. And you have no effect on the probability of purchasing antidepressants. You see what I mean? Unlike in the US you would not have this. You would see that the worker in the firm that closes down compared to the identical worker in the firm that does not close down would increase significantly its consumption of antidepressants and sleeping pills and all that, and opioids. No effect either of the fact of losing your job in Denmark on the probability of having a circulatory problem, and no effect on mortality. So they have a good model. And why is that security model a good model? It's good because it favors innovation. Why? Because in Denmark, it's very easy for firms to hire and lay off. Because you know that when once a worker is laid off, the state will step in, provide training and retrain the worker so that she can bounce back into the labor market. Okay? So they have a system of flexicurity which favors creative destruction and innovation, and at the same time does a very good job at protecting workers. So they found a way. They didn't have to become less protective in order to be more innovative. That's my point with the flexicurity. Okay. The policy is education. Here I represent the probability of inventing as a function of parental income. And you see that the left-hand side curve, this one is the US based on current data. That's the US based on historical data going back to 1880. And that's Finland. And you see that when your parents are on the top centiles of the income distribution, you are much more likely to innovate, whether you are in the US or in Finland. I was very surprised for Finland, because in Finland, education is free and very high quality. In Finland, I was expecting a flat. I was expecting that the probability of your becoming an inventor would be independent from of your social background, because they have a very good, free and very high quality school system. Okay, so it was an enigma for me. And what we did is to say, well, first, let's, with Aksigit and Toivonen and Aitinen, using Finnish data, we said, well, let's control for parental education. And you can see, once you control for parental education, this J curve flattens out a lot. So it's not so much that the richer parents in Finland give you money to study, because you don't need, school is free. But it turns out that the higher earning parents are also the more educated parents, and they transmit knowledge and aspiration to their children. And that's why they have a higher probability of becoming inventor. But then it was not, that didn't solve fully my enigma, my questioning, because I said, if the school system is so good, why should parental education matter at all? The school could replace fully the parents. And in fact, what happened is that in Finland, they had a reform in 1970. Prior to 1970 in Finland, the school system was kind of segregated. You have very few people who would finish high school. And the 1970 reform made it compulsory to finish high school. And so, and while keeping the same high quality of schooling. So they had, you had the before and after 1970. And what was important is that here I compare the probability of becoming an inventor for someone who goes to school prior to 1970, the ratio to someone with the same parental income, but who went to school before 1970. And what you realize is that the 1970 reform in Finland increased a lot the probability of becoming an inventor for those children that were in that category, not so much for the top. You see? So when they did, in fact, the problem we have many lost Marie Curie or lost Einstein. We have many kids who are very smart, but they are born to families that cannot fully provide them with the knowledge and aspirations, okay? When you implement a reform of the education system like the Finnish reform of 1970, in fact, you make your economy more innovative because more people can become innovators. You have less lost Einsteins, but at the same time, you make it more inclusive because you have more people can be actors of the growth. So education is also, if you do a high quality education system, it's also a way to become more innovative and more inclusive, okay? And the last one, and I will finish there, I go back to competition. You remember I told you about the secular stagnation, the huge growth decline in the US in the 2000s, okay, from there to there, okay? And I told you that it was it's due to the fact that the IT revolution that boosted growth in the US between 1995 2005 came along with the emergence of superstar firms, and that these superstar firms ended up discouraging entry of new firms, and that's why you had the entry rate of all firms going down in the 2000s. But now, suppose you reform competition policy in the US, what will happen? Well, first, you will boost growth and innovation because you have more entrants who are innovating. But as also, we remember that entrant innovation is a source of social mobility. You increase creative destruction. So by reforming competition policy in the US and reducing entry barriers, okay, you will boost innovation and growth in the US, and at the same time, you will boost social mobility because entrant innovation, it means that you are boosting creative destruction, which is the main driver of social mobility, okay? So you see, flexicurity, education, competition are three types of policies that can make you both more innovative and more inclusive. So that's the book that we wrote with Céline and Simon, Power of Creative Destruction, Harvard University Press. And there is another book here, which is a Festschrift book, a book by young researchers that drew on the theory and recent contributors. That's another book, Harvard University Press, edited by Ufuk Aksigi and John Van Rienen, The Economics of Creative Destruction. And thank you very much. I think I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Philippe, for your. Thank you very much for your enthusiastic expose. I think everybody is still here and awake, despite the fact that that it's quite hot. We still have a good half an hour for questions, and then afterwards there will be the cocktail, which is already set up in the courtyard. But there's a microphone circulating, actually being set up on the allée lateral on both sides. So if you want to ask a question, please come forward, and I would just ask you to say your name and where you come from or where you are now. It can be a question about economics, about creative destruction, about AI, and about many other things. So don't be too shy. And we have one by Jean-Pascal, please.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir, bravo pour la présentation.
Peut utiliser l'autre.
Thanks very much for the presentation. That was really outstanding. Just one question. If you were elected President of Europe tomorrow, what would be your two decisions you will make to boost Europe better off, not only productivity?
A big problem in Europe is to do things with the 27 countries is very difficult. I mean, so I would try to follow Draghi's recommendations, but the problem is how you make it happen. And my preference is for a coalition of the willing. So, for example, on Friday, there is a France-German summit. And I believe France and Germany, maybe the UK join in, maybe other countries decide to join in. We should not wait until the 27 countries agree to start implementing the recommendation of Draghi. For example, we could very well right away create a single French-German market for high-tech firms. We could build an AI gigapole, megapole, okay, AI right away. We can do a French-German DARPA for AI and defense, for example, right away. We can push together to emulate the Swedish example to establish institutional investors. So there are a number of areas where France and Germany together could jumpstart the process. And then you tell other countries you want to join in, but join in. And maybe one role that the EU could play was to help the Stackelberg followers to catch up with the Stackelberg leaders. That would be the way to do. That's the way I think. Because if we wait for all 27 countries to agree, we'll never get anywhere. That's my own view.
So a smaller Europe, basically.
So we'll see if Macron and Merz follow our recommendations. Let's find out on Friday.
Yep. Other question? Please don't be shy.
No, don't never be shy.
Forward to the light. Thank you.
Yep, thank you for. Ça marche? Thank you for your presentation. So I got two questions, but it was one global question. Firstly, did you do a model between innovation and social system, and maybe you find a negative or positive correlation
between
innovation and social system?
Social.
Yeah.
No, but my way to look at social is not. It depends what you do. So, but I think there are policies. That's my way of looking at it. Is not say I will put on the left-hand side innovation and on the right-hand side arbitrary measures of social. I will look at how I can get which extent innovation reduces inclusion and protection, and which policies can drive both. You see, and that's what I'm interested in. So I mentioned, for example, Flexicurity, competition and education. Those are policies that I know can make you more inclusive and more innovative. So that's what I'm interested in. Policies that would make me more innovative while preserving and even improving the European social model. That's what I'm after. And so that's the way to look at it. It's not just regressing inequality broadly to growth. You see, that I think will get you nowhere because both are endogenous. So it's more like to look at policies and say, well, there are various drivers, and how can you manage to because that's Europe. I mean, Europe is now, if you look at Europe, for example, versus US, where do you have freedom and democracy worldwide now? It's in Europe, nowhere else. You go to US, you are scared to talk. You don't talk freely nowadays in US. You don't, okay? So you have the National Guard in Washington. You don't have the army in the streets in Paris. So number one, okay? Number two, where do you have a social model? In Europe, and we can improve it, but you have a crappy social model in the US. You absolutely don't want to emulate the US social model, okay? Where do you have concern for the environment? In Europe, much more. So what we want is to become more innovative without renouncing, without giving up on the concern for a social model and the concern for the environment. That's the challenge we face.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was, which are the main threat and limits to your model right now? Because you didn't talk about this.
To achieving that, the threat to, political economy. For example, in France, we see now we have a big problem to vote a budget, which is very mild. If you look, the Beirut plan is not perfect. You could improve it. There is enormous room for improvement. But in fact, everybody is obsessed in France by the 2027 presidential election. They don't care a damn about the plan. They just want to create chaos to say, I can be the savior. Okay. And that's dramatic because we are at the time. Germany, France, UK, we can be really the drivers of this long awaited wake up of Europe. You see what I mean? We can't wait. We have the Ukraine thing. We need to wake up. And France cannot get a budget. And the Beirut plan compared to the restructuring plan you had in Germany, in Sweden, in Spain, in Italy, it's peanuts. It's very mild. The effort which is asked with the Beirut plan is very mild. And you can't get people to agree to it. And we will generate more. Tomorrow, Beirut may step down, and we have again political instability with our interest rate spread soaring up again. That's what I see an obstacle. You see, that's one big obstacle. That I think that's that way you want one. We are in the middle of one in France.
Okay, thank you.
Teacher, thank you. Thank you again for your presentation. I would like to know, how do you think innovation can overcome one of our main challenge now is like climate change? Because when you have AI, for example, as a model, we still depend on our resources. It's still complicated to imagine still continue to innovate it in this world.
Yeah. So my response is that, of course, one response could be degrowth, okay? But I don't believe in degrowth. When we had the lockdown, the COVID, you remember we had a big lockdown between March and June 2020. French GDP went down by 35% and CO2 emission by 8%. But I mean, do we want to be in a permanent lockdown? No, we don't. So the alternative is green innovation. So we need to direct innovation towards green. And the problem is that firms don't spontaneously innovate green. Firms that did a lot of dirty innovation in the past, they tend to want to continue in dirty innovation. So you need to redirect firms' innovation towards green. You do that with a carbon tax, but you do that with green industrial policy. So you need to have a whole set of policies to redirect firms' innovation towards green innovation. And I think the answer is you want to redirect innovation towards green technologies, towards quality versus quantity. And that you can do. And that, again, institution and policy is the way to direct innovation. But you don't have to renounce to innovation, but you just redirect innovation.
Thank you.
I have another question. Isn't AI different from any other kind of innovation since it requires bigger infrastructures to produce results than former revolutions, therefore making it easier for big companies to eliminate competition?
AI, I think, more to a higher respect than a previous revolution. You automate not only tasks in the production of goods and services, but also tasks in the production of ideas. And maybe you force more jobs to adapt. That's for sure. But so maybe the challenge is bigger. If you want AI to boost employment and boost growth, the challenge is bigger than it was with previous revolution. But if you manage to do it, then you can be very successful.
But if I'm not mistaken, AI requires like lots of infrastructures and data centers, and those are kind of things that aren't accessible to the common people.
Yeah, that's right. A good question. That's why we recommended in our report last year to have local data centers and local computing center. And so that's why I believe that you need competition policy, but also industrial policy. Very often you oppose industrial policy. That's an area where you need both. You need to develop data centers and computing centers, in Europe in particular. We don't want to be fully dependent on the US. So that's where industrial policy, European industrial policy is very important. And that's why, there is a lot of talk about defense, industrial policy. But in defense, I would include AI. I don't think we only need to build tanks and ammunitions. We need to also, because it's a lot about drones and things, AI has to be part of the DARPA, of the European DARPA that I want to build up.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Hello. So a rising concern in the discourse around generative AI is the material cost to develop the technological infrastructure, particularly in terms of fuel and water. How would you address those concerns to implement AI successfully and on a larger scale and regulate its environmental impact?
So sorry, I can't hear very well. Which concern? No, it's my fault. I only have 65% on my, yes, and I should have 100. I need to add.
I think there is a rising concern about the material cost to develop the technological infrastructure necessary for AI, particularly in terms of the amount of water and fuel that it's consuming.
Oh, energy consumption.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Alors, we are, I want to just mention a project that we are, Céline is involved with me, and we have other co-authors, Lynn Barrage and Matthias Abitbol. We are looking at Veolia. Veolia is a water company, and it uses AI to detect problems that helps Veolia reduce the amount of waste that need to be retreated. And so it's true that uses AI and therefore energy, but they save on energy by reducing the amount of waste they generate. You see what I mean? So you can look at the whole chain and see overall, is AI good or bad when you look at overall on the energy consumption. And we hope to get the result that, at least in the case of Veolia, even taking into account the energy consumption of AI, it was altogether energy effective to use AI. You see what I mean? Because AI is true, consumes energy, but it helps optimize on the use of scarce resources. And we have to explore that. So, so the effects of AI on energy and CO2 emission is ambiguous. And I think, and the question is, what are the policies that would enhance the positive side?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, thank you for your lesson. It was very interesting. So I was asking myself the question that...
Can you speak a bit louder? Because really,
sorry.
It's my aging.
So I'm asking myself the question if AI could lead to an uniformization of firms, of education, of thinking in general, rather than stimulating competition. And I don't know, I was asking myself the question because that was not, but anyway.
That's like why. Sorry, I think the sound is in from.
No, I was just asking myself the question about how AI could sometimes not stimulate creativity and firms' productivity, but leads to more uniformization. And I was asking myself the question of how it could be in balance.
Yes, yes, sir.
So you think technology may kill creativity? Is that the question? J'ai un problème d'ouïe. Can you? The sound is not good, in fact. The acoustic is not good. Can you come closer and tell me the question or something? C'est peut-être mieux sans micro. L'innovation. L'innovation ou AI? Mais qu'est-ce qui génère l'uniformisation? Ah, l'AI, okay. So the question was more the danger that AI would reduce diversity of ideas. But that's a good question. And would standardize too much, we become too conformist with AI. We all become the same. On the other hand, AI increases a lot the ability to recombine ideas into new ideas. So, and you saw what I show you, the AI patents, they have more novelty, more generality, and they're more cited. So if they were, uniform, they would not make it to be, original or to be highly cited. You see what I mean? So I could say that if you saw the picture, the graph with the AI, the patent citing AI, they tend to be more original. They tend to be more diverse. So that I see that as an encouraging sign. I don't tell you that there is no danger of all becoming the same. But if I look at this graph, I have the feeling that you generate more non-incremental patents, non-incremental knowledge, because you recombine much more remote things together. And so you create many more possibilities. So that makes me maybe overly optimistic. But voilà, but it has to be analyzed. Voilà.
Thank you. It was interesting.
Thank you, Professor Aghion.
Yes.
I was wondering, you were presenting some cifras from a study you made about the positive effect of IA on employment.
Yes.
And I was wondering if this positive effect wasn't the result of the fact that the companies you analyze weren't in a competition with other companies that had also AI.
No, you have competition. Those who adopt, usually they increase employment at the expense of firms that do not adopt. That's what we found, for example, for robotization. But some people believe it's a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game because overall, thanks to the productivity effect, you have a better quality-price ratio. And therefore, you draw consumers, you lure consumers that were not at all interested in this kind of product. So you increase the total market size. That's why it's not a zero-sum game. It's true that those who adopt AI grow employment at the expense of those who don't. But the overall market size increases because you attract consumers that were not at all into this kind of goods.
So do you think that with an economy that in the next few years with approximately totally integrate IA, we will see the same results of positive effect or not?
Really? Maybe that I look at what I have what I have. Now maybe what I say is that it's not obvious that it has a negative effect, and you have this productivity effect playing out. Now, what I believe is that I believe still that you need to adapt institutions, education, flexicurity. That will be very important to maximize the scope, for a positive impact. So I see now currently that the impact is not as negative as people thought, but it doesn't mean that we should sleep on our laurels. You see, we should really work hard on adapting our institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one quick question, more about the next step. If we manage to foster innovation in Europe, do you think Europe would be able to grow faster than the US? And if so, what do you think is our comparative advantage to kind of support that?
I don't know. The name of the game is not to grow faster than the US. The name of the game is to stop the decline. When we have a big decline, it's not only on growth. We missed the IT revolution largely, and we don't want to miss the AI revolution. Because you see, the problem is that in France, for example, you have the automobile sector, it's a big sector. But now with the electric cars, the sector is in big danger of disappearing. And therefore, the danger is that we will have mass unemployment, everywhere. So we want to make sure that will not happen. And that's why we need to absolutely stop the technological decline. It's not just say grow faster than US, it's make sure that we don't miss this revolution like we missed the previous one. And that I think is the big challenge.
So what do you think would allow Europe to not miss this train? Why do you think it's not too late?
The Draghi recommendations, which I think we should start implementing with Germany, with UK, single market, institutional investment, invest on education and research, create this DARPA on basic research, create labs like the LabX that work very well in France, extend the LabX experience to the whole of Europe and to France and Germany and then other countries. Those are the things we need to do.
Thank you.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for the lecture. While listening to it, I kept thinking about AI as a sort of technology, like it just kept popping up in my mind. And I remembered one course that I had in the past that was talking about how the human anatomy can change in the future because it is overusing AI and technology. So I didn't hear anything about like the future impacts on the human body and anatomy. I don't know if you know my reference, but it was about the anatomy changing in different ways, like the back being more arched, human fingers becoming more prominent and more rigid, just because we use technology too much. So now I'm thinking, since a lot of countries are starting to use AI, how is it going to change our anatomy for the future generations too?
Well, that's that's well beyond my my area of research. I hope we will, minimize the scope for bad use of AI, and we need regulation. When I said before that, we have too many regulations, that's true, but we can't be unregulated. So we need to have some regulations, make sure that property rights are protected, make sure that you don't have evil use of AI, you minimize the scope for them, for those use. I hope, it will not derail. Now what do we need to do for that? That's not up to my level of management, but that's well beyond me to tell you how. But anyway, you can't choose not to go there. No AI is not an option. It's there. So all what you can do is to adapt as well as you can to this revolution and surf on this revolution, not undergo this revolution, not suffer the revolution, but you just harness the revolution. And that's the name of the game. You cannot just say, I ignore the revolution. That's not an option. The option is to make the best of it.
Yes, I totally agree. It's just sometimes it could be more difficult to control it and keep it under control too.
That's why education, I think, is very important.
Yes, but then
is paramount. If you are uneducated, if you are well educated, I think you can manage.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your compelling lecture. Another way growth can be driven is by free trade, and in a context marked by the global resurgence of protectionism and persistent barriers within the EU itself. What would be your most compelling argument to convince a skeptic that protectionism is an illusion rather than a solution?
Yeah, but exactly because I'm Schumpeterian. Why is free trade growth enhancing? For at least 3 reasons. First, because you enlarge the market for innovating goods, okay? That's why I mentioned, all the barriers we have within Europe, okay? So that gets in the way of innovating in Europe. So you need to have a market for innovations, okay? That's where free trade is important. Second thing is that when you have free trade, you have more competition. And we know that competition is a driver of frontier innovation because you innovate to escape competition. Third, trade favors technology transfers, and therefore favors catching up and transferring technology. So for all those reasons, you see, free trade is growth enhancing. It also reduces global inequality. You know why has global inequality gone down? Because it favored China caught up, India caught up. So that reduced poverty in China and India enormously. It's true that free trade increased inequality within advanced countries, but there were those countries that managed very well. Denmark, for example, with the social model they have no problem with being a small, open economy. It's when you have very bad social system, like in the US, that free trade gives you Trump. Or the UK is not as bad as the US, it gives you Brexit, because they didn't have a social model that would allow them to protect the citizen against free trade, But when you have a good flexicurity system, you have only the good sides of free trade, not the bad sides. That's why it's so important to have the inclusive and protective that I was mentioning before.
So with our last question.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your lectures. It's been very interesting. And some has argued that Europe's climate policies has been part of the decline in innovation. And I'm just curious whether you agree with that point. And
Europe has a declining innovation, yeah.
No, because of quite a strong climate policies, and such as the Fit for 50.
I don't believe in that. Okay. No, one thing which is true in Europe, they had a climate policy which was very much carbon tax. And only carbon tax is a driver. It's important to have the carbon tax because, but we need also the green industrial policy. And the problem is that in Europe, they underplayed the industrial policy instrument. And they overplayed carbon tax. They had a very punitive they had a punishing approach to climate. And we need to have a pro-investment and pro-innovation approach to climate. That's what I believe. So it's not that they had a concern, it's that they were very much carbon tax, and not at all green industrial policy. I believe you need both. You need to create alternatives And you need that those who don't use the alternative, they get the carbon tax. So you need the carrot and the stick. But the carrot is the green industrial policy. And that was underplayed in Europe. So it's not that they did too much climate. They did too much climate only focusing on carbon tax and totally downplaying green industrial policy.
Okay, thank you.
Close session.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give Professor Aghion a small present. It's not only a red tote bag, which you know. By the way, I wear a blue scarf, which is Korean and very innovative. It has a story, and we can discuss it at the cocktail. But in the bag, you have a book about Sciences Po, and that's our gift, collective gift. To the